Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim daf Memchet. Today's daf is sponsored by Deborah Shabes in memory of her mother's yurtzeit, Judith Schoenfeld Shabes. And today's daf is sponsored by Lana Friedman in memory of Yosef Eliezer Ben Chaim, who Shloshim recently passed. He was a devoted Torah scholar and my best friend's father, someone dear to my heart. Okay, we're going to get started now with our daf. We started the Mishnah yesterday with a case. Hareni alecha cherem hamudar asur. Hareat alay cherem hanoder asur. These are cases where somebody says to somebody else, "You're cherem to me," or "I'm cherem to you." And then we said this is matching on Shea Galil. The cherem means a davar hanadur, something you normally would vow about, and therefore it's a vow. But it's only a vow for one side. That's quite obvious. If you say both directions, then both are asurim. And now we have, however, and this is the big line that's going to move us into the rest of this Mishnah, which is Shnehem mutarim b'davar shel olei bavel v'asurim b'davar shel taha'il. We're now distinguishing between olei bavel, which I did read in Safrai. There wasn't so much to add here in terms of what he said there, but if you want, you could try to read it and see. But basically, there are things, as we said yesterday, that were made into hefker, that are ownerless, as opposed to things that are owned by the city. The best distinction I can think about is that the things for Olei Bavel are owned by everybody, and therefore owned by nobody. There are things that kind of no one really has ownership rights to, whereas things of Otaha'ir, our city, we basically support the things of the city. And therefore the city are our things. It's not for all Jews, right? Whereas the things that are Olei Bavel were for all Jews. Things that are for our city, so they're owned by us and not by all the Jewish people. It's another possible distinction, as opposed to going, let's say, with Tosfot, who said that the Olei Bavel specifically having some insight into, we don't want to end up with a situation where somebody can't come to the temple. So they basically decided, let's make everything ownerless so that we don't have this issue. So, and the truth is, you'll see where Tosfot gets it from the continuation of our Mishnah. It doesn't exactly say it directly, but there's an indicator later we're going to see, actually in the Gemara, of people who might have done this in a different situation. So now, sorry if I'm talking without actually seeing it inside. We'll get to it later, and you'll understand what I meant. So again, we make a distinction between things that are communal property, that's ownerless communal property, nobody really owns it, versus things that are owned by the people of the city, in which case everyone is a part owner of it. And then you can't use that if you're forbidden to benefit from someone in your city. So now the Mishnah goes into defining these different types of things. What goes into what category? It's very important to know. Ezehu davar shel olei bavel, kegon harabayit, the Temple Mount, ha'azarot, the azarot in the harabayit, habor shebe'emtza derech, and the wells that they had filled up with water for people to drink on the way to go to Aliyah L'Regel. Ezehu davar shel taha'ir, what are the things that are considered owned by the inhabitants of the city? Kegon harechava v'hamerchatz u'beit hakneset v'ateva v'asfarim. Okay, this is the city, the big square in the city, which, if you remember from Ta'anit, we talked about that's where they would do the big prayer when they had the big fast days. The merchatz, the bathhouse, the beit hakneset, which, by the way, could be a shul, also a gathering place. Literally, knesset means lichnos, to gather people, like the town hall building. Hateva, okay, that's where the chazan would daven from, and the sfarim, and the books. So all these things are communal property. So if you end up in a bit of a problematic situation, you can't go to the shul in the city because it's owned by the person that you're not allowed to benefit from. Va'kotev chelko lanasi. Now, this line you'll see is kind of in the middle of nowhere here, okay? It just says, and you write your part to the Nasi. The Nasi is kind of like the head of the city, the mayor, you could call him. You can write your portion to the Nasi. This seems to be, even though it's not introduced in this way, a solution to this problem. If you're forbidden to benefit from me, and you want to go to shul, so I can write, so it's true, I said, I don't want you to benefit from me. I more meant, I don't want you to come into my house. I don't want that. I didn't really mean you can't go to shul. So I can write my portion of the shul to the Nasi. I can give him my share, and then I'm no longer an owner of it. So it seems like a solution, even though it's not really written as a solution in the Mishnah. It kind of just seems like, well, these are things that are part of the city, And in addition, someone who writes his part to the Nasi. So sounds like, and the Gemara is going to ask right away, sounds like you're saying if you write your portion to the Nasi, it's actually forbidden because it's in the section that's talking about if you write your if you forbid someone to benefit, and these are the things that are part of the city that are owned by people and you wouldn't be able to benefit from. And in addition, someone who writes to the Nasi, so it doesn't really make so much sense, to which the Gemara will explain it the way I did, which is this is actually a way out. The Mishnah is kind of missing words here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Echad kotev lenasi, v'echad kotev lehedyot. He says, you don't have to write it to the Nasi. I could give my portion to anybody. I could give it to my next door neighbor. And I could say, I'm giving my rights to the shul to you. Why does it have to be the Nasi? Ma ben kotev lenasi lekotev lehedyot. What's the difference between them? Comes Rabbi Yehuda and explains, Shakotev lenasi ein tzarich lizakot, lehedyot tzarich lizakot. He says, you don't need to, there's a certain, it's easier if you do it to the Nasi. The Nasi is kind of considered, like think about the mayor of your city, is somewhat considered the owner of the city. So if I say I'm giving my portion to the mayor of the city, I don't need to do any sort of formal transaction. Okay, lizakot usually means I give to you on behalf of someone else. I say, I'm giving this to you to acquire on behalf of someone. We have this concept, zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. Remember we've learned that, which is if something's good for someone, you can do it even if they're not there. So, for example, people do this on Shabbos. If you want to bring a gift on Shabbos, it's a little bit of a problem. Okay, there's a halachic problem because you're passing over ownership of something to someone on Shabbat. So what should you do? You should give it to someone before Shabbat and say, acquire this for that person, and then it's already theirs. So then you give it to them on Shabbat because you're not transferring ownership. So that's what they're saying here. If I want to transfer you my part of the bathhouse or the shul or whatever it is, I'd have to do it through, and I'd have to either actually do some sort of transaction with you or do it with somebody else to acquire it on your behalf. But if it's the Nasi, I don't need to do that because the Nasi is kind of the default owner of the towns. I don't even need to do zikui here. Okay? Now, or lizakot. Chachamim omrim, echad ze v'echad ze tzrichim lizakot. No, there's no difference between the Nasi and anybody else. And the rabbis don't disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. You could give it to somebody else. So, and anyone you want to give it to, even the Nasi, you'd still have to go through a formal transaction and do zikui. You could do it to your next door neighbor and say, acquire this on behalf of the Nasi. But you'd have to do something. To which he says, so now he has to explain why did the Mishnah. Now it's interesting because you're having a discussion in the Mishnah about the Mishnah. This doesn't happen so often. It's almost like a Gemara type sugya in the Mishnah already. Lo dibru b'nasi ela behoveh. Comes the rabbis and they say the reason it gave the example specifically of the Nasi is because that was typically what was done out of respect for the mayor. Rashi says, derech lachlok kavod lenasi. It was just more typical that if you're going to give up your portion in the public property, you give it up to the mayor of the city. And therefore, that's the case they gave, but not because really there's any difference between giving it to the Nasi or anybody else. You could theoretically give it to anybody. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. A different thing Rabbi Yehuda adds, Ein Anshe Galil tzrichim lichtov. The people in the Galilee don't need to write let's say we're living in the Galilee and I forbid you to benefit from me and you want to go to the bathhouse. I don't have to give up my portion of the bathhouse. Why not? Shekvar katvu avotehen al yedehen. Their fathers already took care of it. The fathers, meaning our ancestors in the Galilee, already made all public property ownerless. We'll have to see why in the Gemara, why they did this. So first the Gemara deals with the first thing I mentioned, which is Amay Mitzal, which is that line about Hakotev Chakol Nasi, which sounds like it's coming. It is coming after we just said, what are all the things that are forbidden? And then it says, and also, almost it sounds like, one who writes their portion to the Nasi. So why would it be forbidden? Amarav Sheshet, Hachi Katan. Rav Sheshet says, no, you misunderstood. This is how you should understand it, the way I already explained the Mishnah. Umata kanatan, it's missing these two important words. How do you rectify the situation if you can't benefit from me and you want to go to the bathhouse? So we each write, if it's both of us that are forbidden to each other, we each write our portion to the Nasi. Okay, now we can skip this whole parentheses because it's just a quote from the Mishnah. It doesn't really belong here. That's why it's in parentheses. It means it got in here accidentally. We should take it out. Now skip down to the words Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that last line. Now the Gemara is going to relate to that. That was just a quote from the Mishnah. Tanya. We're going to bring a Braita which has a little more elaboration here. And now you're going to see where Tosfot got it. That the Olei Bavel specifically made everything ownerless in thinking about what if people get angry at each other and forbid each other one to the other. Obviously was relying on this Gemara, which is taking the concept from here and applying it to there. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Anshe Galil kan tiranim hayu. They were people who fought with each other all the time. V'hayu nodrim hana'ah ze mizeh, and they would basically be forbidding each other all the time through vows. Okay, if you know, people have been wondering how commonplace was this or not. Apparently in the Galilee, this was very common. So came the fathers, meaning whoever was living now, was benefiting from the previous generation, or we don't know how many generations ago. Avotehen is used always loosely, but they foresaw this issue and they said, you know what, people are fighting with each other, and we better make a situation where people are going to be allowed to benefit from all the public places in the city, and therefore they already wrote all their portion to the Nasi. Everybody gave up ownership, they turned it into ownerless. So now you see why the Tosfot said it about Olei Bavel. Also, when they came back, they probably, again, whether it was because people were fighting or not, I don't know, in Olei Bavel. But they at least foresaw that if this were to happen, we don't want to prevent a situation from people being allowed to benefit. Now you might say, why didn't they just try to make peace among people, right? And it made me think of this big ad campaign going on in Israel. I can't ever remember what the ads say, but it's an ad campaign against road rage. Unfortunately, in Israel, there's a lot of road rage, and it's an ad campaign basically trying to, I forget what it was, but we were commenting on it in my family when we saw it. It's admitting there is road rage and not really trying to get rid of road rage, just saying, kind of, don't try to get yourself involved in it, and kind of accepting that this is unfortunately a sad reality that exists, and we just have to figure out, how to best manage it, where we know we're not going to get rid of it, but we could try at least to have it escalate less, and that's kind of there. Here we know that people are going to do this kind of thing, and in fact maybe that's why we had all these we had all these opinions at the beginning of Masechet Nedarim. Don't take vows, as a way of saying, stop fighting and don't vow against each other and calm your anger down. But in the end, what are we going to do? People are people and they're going to fight. And unfortunately, we have to figure out how to deal with the fact that it does exist, which is unfortunate, right? There's two ways to go about it, right? Obviously, we want to try to minimize it, but we also have to deal with the fact that we admit that it exists, because it's important to admit it exists and make other kind of arrangements to be allowed to make sure that we can live in a society with this going on and figure out how to manage within it. So that road rage really made me think of it. Now I have to go back and see exactly what the ad said so I can l'dayek yoter, be more clear about what the idea was. But anyway, that's the concept, that we know it exists and try to just, not get yourself involved in it, I think was the idea. Okay, matniti, new Mishnah. Hamudar hana'ah mechavero ve'en lo ma yochal. Someone is forbidden to benefit from his friend, and he doesn't have any food to eat. This is very similar to what we saw recently about the two people on the path, and they had nothing to eat. It seems to be repeated again, but in a bit of a different, and in fact then we quoted the end of this Mishnah. So it's similar. The issue here is the same as the previous. You want to go to shul, but you can't because you're forbidden to benefit from your neighbor, right, who partly owns it. Here also, you want food, but the person who's going to give you food can't give you the food. You're not allowed to benefit from them, so what do? What are our solutions? Just like there, you can give up your portion in the public property. Likewise here, you could give up your portion of your own private property. Notnola acher l'shumatana, gift it to somebody else. V'hala mutar ba, once you gift it to somebody else, the other person can benefit from it. Maaseh be'echa bebeit choron. However, it was the story in Beit Choron. The first question of the Gemara is, I don't understand. You gave this halacha, and now you gave a story that totally contradicts the halacha. How does that work? So there was a story in Beit Choron. We already saw this, but now I actually finally, there was one thing that I was struggling with the details. I figured it out finally. It's pretty simple. It's one of those things with pronouns that it's just not clear who was who. So, and also there's a problem with the girsa, which also confuses things. Haya aviv, now it says noder hemenu hana, which really should be mudal mimenu hana. The father was forbidden to benefit from his son. Okay, we're going to give them names of the avot. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, okay? Because there's Avram who's the father, Yitzchak is the son, and now here's the part I missed last time. V'haya mesi et bino. Now it's confusing because I thought originally we were talking about the father was marrying off the son, but no. It's the son is marrying off his son. So the father Avram wants to go to Yaakov's wedding. Okay, so we have Avraham and Yitzchak are in a tiff. Yitzchak forbids Avraham to benefit from him. And then Yitzchak is making a wedding for Yaakov, his own son. That was the point that I missed last time. V'amar lechavero. So Yitzchak goes to his friend. He goes to Shlomo and he says, Chatzeru sudan etunin hinan lefanecha. Okay, he says two parts. Okay, first he says, my courtyard and my meal that I'm making for my son's wedding is all yours. Ela kedeshi avo abba v'yochal imanu b'seuda, but only so that my father can come and eat at his grandfather's wedding. Amal, to which the Shlomo, who gets this gift, says, Im shalihen harehim muktashim l'shamayim. If they're mine, great, I'm sanctifying them to the temple. They're not yours anymore. Amar le, natati l'chat shali shetaktishem l'shamayim. So comes Yitzchak, he said, what, did I give you my meal so that you can... You remember what happens now. If he sanctifies it to the temple, no one can even come eat at the meal. Forget about his father. That's it. You have no meal. You have no courtyard anymore. It's all sanctified. No one can benefit from sanctified items. He says, I didn't give you my meal and my courtyard so you can sanctify it to the temple. Amar lo, natati li et shalcha, ela kedesh de'ei, abba v'avicha ochlim v'shotinu mitchatzim zeh lezeh. You wanted to give it to me so that you said it explicitly, so that your father and you could go eat and have a good time together. And, even though you have a vow not allowing you to do this, if you have on taloi b'rosho, and you want it to be, he talks about himself in the third person, you want to basically put that sin on me, I'm going to be responsible for you breaking your vow? No way, no how, I'm not getting involved in this. And as a result, Amru Chachamim, Kol matana she'ena she'im ikdish shetei mekudeshet, eina matana. The rabbi said any gift that you're not given full rights to it, meaning that theoretically, if you wanted to, you could sanctify it. That's not a gift. And basically, if anyone tries to do like what this guy in Beit Choron, this Yitzchak guy tried to do to Shlomo, it's not going to work. Okay, it's not a valid gift. Okay, just one second. Right. So this is a good question. What you're asking, Tova, someone also asked in the Hebrew class. I don't have a good answer, which is why couldn't they have undone the vow? That would have been another way to do it. Okay, so that's a good question. Why they couldn't undo the vow, and I don't know the answer to that. Okay, it is a possible way they could have gone. Maybe he just thought this was an easier way to go. First of all, you don't have to gather 3 people together. You don't have to do a whole ceremony. You don't have to come up with a whole reason and all that. You just say, oh, take this. He had no idea what was coming his way. He didn't realize that was what the guy was going to do. So again, just to review the story, we see from a question that it's not Avraham who it belonged to in the beginning. It was Yitzchak. It was the son who was marrying off his own son. So the courtyard and the meal was Yitzchak's, okay? And then it's a matter of, right, can Avraham come to this meal or not? So Yitzchak tried to give off his property to someone. In the end, right, so it's a good question. In the end, is it Yitzchak's or not? Right? So what the rabbis are saying after this is it's not actually a gift, okay? It didn't work. It didn't work to get rid of the vow, but it also didn't really pass hands into this other person. I don't know, though, if that's true, because the rabbis came after the story and said it. So the rabbis are saying, if this happens again, right, this won't be a valid gift. The question is, what happened in this actual case? They don't really tell us. Like, was this actually a valid gift, and that guy sanctified it and sanctified, and there's something you can do, or not really? I think they're basically saying, no, it's not really. You didn't really do anything. Okay? To which the Gemara says, Ma'aseh listo, I don't understand. The beginning of the Mishnah said, give it to someone as a gift, and then the person is allowed to have it. And then the Gemara brings a story where you can't do this, you can't give it as a gift. So how does that work? To which they answer, it's missing words. And this is what it means to say, V'im hochiach safo al tchilato asul. And Becky, I think this relates to what you're asking about ha'arama. Isn't this like someone tricking the system? And that's what they're basically saying. It depends if the end, right, if the end proves about what his intent was in the beginning, that he never really intended to give the gift, like the story of Beit Choron, then it's forbidden. So if you really fair and square give this gift to someone and then they can give it to someone else, that totally works. But if you didn't really mean to give them the gift and you were just doing it for this one person, that is, again, what does a gift mean? It means I give up my ownership rights. He obviously didn't mean to give up his ownership rights. So therefore, if in the end it's proven that you didn't really mean to give it as a gift, then it doesn't work. Umasenami, and then, again, this is missing those words. We add those words in, and then that links into, that's our transition to the next, which is, Masenami bebeit choron be'echad dehava sofo mochiach al tchilato. Then we had this case of Beit Choron that the end proved what he was intending originally, that he wasn't really intending to give it as a gift. I actually think it's pretty clear that they would say this wasn't anything, and he still owns the meal, and the father can't come unless he gets rid of the neder, like you said. Amar Rava. Now we're going to have two versions of Rava. One is going to be more limiting in the case of Beit Choron, and one is going to be a more expansive version. Amar Rava. Lo shanu ela. The whole question is, what was wrong with the Beit Choron sale or gift? What was wrong with the gift? Lo shanu ela da amar le v'hinan lefanecha ela kedei sheyavo ab. He basically conditioned it upon, right, I'm giving you this gift just only so that my father can come. That obviously doesn't work, because you're basically saying, I'm not really gifting it to you. I'm only gifting it to you so that my father can come, which means I'm not really giving it to you. Aval amar le, shu lefanecha, sheyavo abba, I'm giving this to you that it'll be yours, and that my father will come. Now, that's different. That's not a condition. I'm only giving this to you so that my father will come. You're basically saying, I'm giving this to you, and it would be nice if my father came. I'm kind of adding the words, it would be nice, but that's kind of what you're saying. And then, midat chau da amar le. And then what you're basically saying is, I'm giving this to you as a gift. If you were so nice as to invite my father and let him come, that would be great. I'd be so happy. In which case, you're accepting it as a gift. It's a gift for you. It's clear it's a gift for you. You want, in addition, you're saying it would be nice if you let my father come, but it's up to you to decide whether you're letting my father come, in which case it's not part of the stipulation of the deal, and it's actually permitted. That would work. Then you would actually get the gift, and if you wanted to, you can invite my father, but if you didn't want to, you didn't have to, and that's why it actually would go through. But, Lishna Achrina Amrin Lan, some people have a different version of what Rava said, and it's the opposite. Or not the opposite, but both are included in the problem. Amar Rava, lo tema, don't say exactly what we said according to the first language of Rava, to the first version. Lo tema tama da amar levihinan lefanecha huda asul. Don't say it's only because the exact words it said in the Mishnah where he said, Ela kadesh yavo abba, but aval amar lehin lefanecha shiavo abba v'yochal mutal. This is all in the don't say. Don't say that if you just say, take it, and it would be nice if my father came, it would be okay. No. Ela afilu amar lehin lefanecha yavo abba v'yochal asul. Even if you use that much looser language and not conditioning it upon your father coming, but saying, it would be nice if my father came, it's a problem. Why? My taima sudato muchachat alav. This is an interesting phrase. The Ran describes it. It's an interesting Ran here. Maybe we'll read through the whole thing, the last 3 lines in the Ran. He says, Hacha shanem, a few lines into the last Dibur HaMatchil in the Ran, Mishum da anan sadeh. Anan sadeh means we all can testify. Something that's so clearly obvious to everyone is called an anan sadeh, because it means the whole world can be witness to this. She'ein adam yechin seudah l'nisuei beno v'notno la'achil. Nobody in their right mind makes a big wedding feast for their child and then goes and gives it as a gift to somebody else. Nobody does that. So therefore, it doesn't matter what language you use. Tilkat sudato muchachat alav. You might not have said it as a condition, but it was obvious it was a condition. It was a stipulation in your statement. Because there's no other reason you would give your wedding feast and your courtyard to somebody else. There's no way, no how. So therefore, it's clear that even though you didn't word it as a stipulation, it was clearly a stipulation, in which case, again, you can't do that kind of thing. That's not valid. Now here it's interesting. There's a machloket, the Ran quotes between the Rashba and the Rambam. So he says, Miu katav Rashba, however, the Rashba wrote, Zal, Didavka kish'amal came b'sha'at matana. This is only, now, how much, this is a good debate, how much does Sudato Muchachad Alav push things in this case? How much does it function here? So the Rashba says, only if you said some sort of words about your father in the giving of the gift. Okay? But, if you didn't say anything when you gave the gift, you just said, I'm giving you my courtyard and my meal, without saying anything about your father, and then a few minutes later you say, oh, by the way, it would be nice if you invited my father, that's fine, according to the Rashba. Because even though, in other words, what you need here is two things, sudato muchachad alav, and some mention of your father during the gifting process. But if you didn't mention your father at all in the gifting process, then you can't claim it was a condition, and the condition is proven that you didn't, right, that it really is a condition, no matter what your language, because no one gives away their meal. No one gives away their meal, but you still need the condition in order for us to say it's clear you only wanted it for your father, and this is totally invalid. If you're missing the wording about your father, and there's nothing about your father, then it wouldn't be an issue at all. But the Rambam disagrees. Aval Rav Rabbeinu Moshe Bar Maimon, the Rambam Zal, Katav, Ta'afilu la'achar sha'a asur, ve'ena matana. The Rambam says, no. Sudato muchachad alav is entirely valid. If you at any point mention your father, that's why you did this, then your wholesale is invalid, your gift is invalid, even, right, because Sudato muchachad alav is so strong that it's going to invalidate any kind of gift here if there's any mention of your father at any point, even going down the road. Okay, so that's an interesting debate, which you could see why they have that debate. How seriously do we take this Sudato muchachad alav? How far do we take it? Okay, now the whole Amud Bet, we're going to go to Amud Bet now, is all a story, a debate about what the halacha will be, another kind of gift. It's not exactly a gift to someone who's forbidden to benefit. And we're going to have a debate, and then we're going to question one of the opinions. Rav Ash is going to question it, then Rav is going to question it. Hahu Gavra, to have a bara. There was a guy who had a son. To have a shamit kifi dikitana. There's many, many interpretations of what this means. Either he was stealing flax from people, he was stealing clothes made of flax from people, he was stealing flax from his father. Maybe he wasn't even that he was stealing, maybe he was doing business, buying and selling flax and not learning Torah. And maybe that was his big sin. Okay? We're not sure what it is, but whatever he was doing, his father wasn't happy with it. Okay? And he really would prefer that his son be sitting and learning. Whether learning instead of stealing or learning instead of working is an interesting debate. So he disowns his son, basically. He says, I'm not giving you any of the money. Not happening. You can't benefit from me at all. Amrule, viharve bar barach surva merabana mai. So people said to him, look toward the future. What if his son ends up being a Talmid Chacham? Do you also want to disown him? A very interesting question I ask him, right? It's also maybe saying, you never know what's going to be. and maybe even he'll change. But right now they're suggesting, would you also want to disown him and not give him any inheritance that he could pass on to his son if his own son would become a Talmid Chacham? Amar lahon, likne hadin. Okay, so you know what? I'll give over my money to my son. Vihave bar bereit sorva merabana likne. Under condition. If my grandson is a Talmid Chacham, then I'm giving you the money now so that you can pass it on to your son as inheritance. Not that you can use it, because again, he was mudar hana'ami menu. But I'm going to give it to you in order to give it to your son. So the question is that a valid sale? Can I give you something that's very similar to the Mishnah? You're giving someone something that you never really intended to give it to them, right? So can I give you something that I wasn't really intending to give to you? I wanted it to pass right over you and go to your son. So, what's the deal? Amrei Pumbeditai, they said, Knei amanat la knotu. This is what you call a kinyan in order to pass it on. V'chol knei amanat la knot lo kane. Any kind of kinyan like this, any kind of acquiring in order, which isn't a real acquiring, it's just to give it to somebody else. That's not a purchase. He didn't acquire anything because you didn't really give him anything. All you were saying was, I'm giving this to you in order to do, right? Which is similar. It's different, but it's similar to what we said about the Maseh and Beit Choron. He gave it to him in order to give it to someone else, right? Even the case where I gave to someone as a gift in the Mishnah, and then they gave it to you to eat because you needed food. Let's say I gave it the reverse case before, but let's say I gave it to someone, they gave it to you because you needed food and you were not permitted to benefit from me. Even that, I gave it as a gift. It's true. The hope was that they would give it to you, but they could do whatever they want with it. Right? If I gave it to them only to give to you, and I said, I'm only giving this to you to give to that person, that would be, it seems like, according to Pobedita, that would not work. Rav Nachman Amar Kane. He says, what do you mean? Kane amanat la knot works. How do I know it works? And it's a very interesting proof because it's not exactly the same thing. Daha, and it's part of the issue that people are going to question him. Ha sudava kinei amanat laknotu. Okay, what's a sudava? Something called a kinyan sudar. Okay, you've probably seen this where people take a handkerchief and they lift it to show that we're doing a transaction. Nowadays, right, people do handshakes or things like that. So in those days, it was called a kinyan sudar. It was basically we were making a deal. I was planning to give you my cow and you were going to give me money, and instead of you giving me the money and me giving you the cow and you pulling the cow as your way of taking ownership over it, we did a kinyan sudar. Nothing passed hands yet. You picked up I took my handkerchief, I gave it to you. You picked it up, you put it down, you gave it back to me. Now, what is this? Right, I was thinking at Tanayim they do that. Thank you for reminding me. I was pretty sure they do it at Tanayim where they do that. I was trying to think of places where people say thank you Batsheva. At the Tanayim they also lift a handkerchief because it's showing we're making a deal here. So now, what do they say? Sudal is kinei amanat lahakno. Nothing changes hands when I give you this handkerchief. Okay, in fact, I get the handkerchief back. Right? You don't keep the handkerchief. So why? Here it's a good example of you acquired something in order to acquire something else. It's not exactly the same. But basically, nothing has changed hands here, and yet you end up with rights to something. So here also, I give the son the money. He doesn't actually acquire it, just like the person who picks up the handkerchief doesn't exactly acquire it. And right, Boaz and the Goel with the shoe, it's also, that's actually the source for Kinyan Sudar, Boaz and the shoe. Anyway, then the money goes to somebody else. Now, it's different, obviously, because in the Kinyan Sudar, you're going to get some item in a few minutes, okay? And that's one of the questions they're going to raise. And also, you are going to acquire some item. In this case, the person who gets the money actually doesn't get to use the money at all. So it's not exactly a complete comparison. But his point is that since Kinyan Sudar works as a Kinyan, where nothing actually transfers hands, then theoretically you could say Kinamanat Laknot also. So nothing changed hands yet, but what's the difference? It will down the road. This should be an effective Kinyan. To which Amar Rav Ashi, number one, Uman le malan de sudara itafis lo mitpas. First of all, let's say we do a Kinyan Sudar. I give you my handkerchief, you pick it up, put it down, and then you keep it. Who says you can't keep it? You don't have rights to it. In other words, while it's true that usually you return it to me, maybe, right, if you kept it, no one would be able to say it's not yours because we did do a kinyan here and I did pass it to you and give it to you. So theoretically, it's not the same thing because theoretically you could keep that sudar even though no one really does. You could if you wanted, which means that it's not the same because the kid could not keep this money. The son was not allowed to keep the money. So therefore, number one, it's not a great comparison. Number two, also, this is a much stronger reason even. As I said before, the sudar is to purchase something that you're purchasing right now. You're saying we're picking this up, and at this point we're right. My cow is going to be yours, and very soon the cow is actually going to go into your possession. But these possessions, when are they going to be acquired by you? Only at some future point. Now here comes the most confusing words of this Gemara. Right now we're not in the handkerchief thing, right? We're not in the sudar, we're in the other case. But what do? They use the language of the handkerchief here. L'chihava, if your grandson in fact becomes a Talmid Chacham, hadar sudra lamare. The handkerchief is far gone, okay? Which is kind of a play on the handkerchief case. What it's saying is, the handkerchief transaction happens immediately, right? So I give you my handkerchief, within a day, the cow ends up in your possession. But this case, we're talking 20 years down the road or something. Maybe he doesn't even, by the way, there's a debate here, whether he even had a son or not, okay? Could be the son wasn't even in existence yet. Or the son certainly wasn't Talmid Chacham. So by the time the transaction actually goes through and the money that you gave to the son goes to the grandson, it's so many years later, there's no evidence anymore. There's no anything left from that original transaction. It's like the handkerchief has disappeared again. There's no handkerchief in that case. But what it's saying is so much time has passed that it's not like something's happening immediate. There happens to be a debate among the commentaries. What if you actually had a deed and you wrote it out in words and the shtar was still in existence? Would that make it different? Do they mean here literally that there's nothing to show for it? years later? And if there is something to show for it, then it would be valid? Or are they saying it's just so much time has passed, it doesn't matter if you still have a shtar? It's just saying there's so much time in between when that happened and now that you can't possibly say that would have been effective. Okay, right. So you could say, why isn't it davar shelo ba'al olam? Theoretically, the difference is that you're actually passing on money here to someone. So I think because of that, it's the condition is not in existence yet, but the condition might come true. Now, it's also strange. So what if you can theoretically make something on condition for 20 years from now? Like, time isn't always such a factor that would cancel out things. But again, you're doing something in a way that's not exactly legit because you're passing it to someone who is not actually allowed to benefit from you, and they're not acquiring it all only to pass on to someone else. So they're saying when that condition were to come true, it's far gone your original, and we don't like to do things that way. It's hard to, I'll already say, it's very hard to understand exactly what this question is. There's many different commentaries, especially because they throw in the handkerchief. It's not 100% clear, this argument, but it seems to be a time factor, which is a clear difference between them. I think what they're really saying, in my mind, it seems the simplest, is you can't compare the sudar to this, because the sudar, it might be, as we say, it's symbolic. It's symbolic of what's about to transfer hands. That's not the same as here, where you're giving something to someone that you're not actually giving it to them, right? And you're only giving it to them to give to someone else if something happens in the future, which is at some very far future point. Maybe they'll never acquire it. It's a weird kind of kinyan. It's not at all like the sudar. So now, those were two questions that Rav Ashi asks. We don't have any answer to this, but we start with other questions against him. Amalei Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman. V'hamatna Beit Choron. But wait, the Beit Choron case was also diknei amanat lahaknotu. He wasn't really giving it to him, right? He was giving it to him just to allow the father to come. It's also like giving something to someone just for some stipulation, right? For one particular way. Velo kakane, and it doesn't work. So how could you say, Rav Nachman, that your thing works when Beit Choron didn't work? So Zimnin Amarle, sometimes Rav Nachman would answer Rava this way, and we're going to see sometimes he answered him another way. It could be Rava bothered him about this on multiple occasions. So Zimnin means sometimes. Sometimes he would say to him, so basically he had two answers he would give to him. Mishum desudato muchachat alav, let's go back to what we saw at the bottom of Amud Aleph, that the meal itself, it's so clear in that case. In this case, it's not so clear. He really is giving it to the son to give it to the grandson. That's okay. In that case, it was clear he wasn't really meaning to give it to the guy, to the friend, to Shlomo, because no one does that. And number two, Zimnin Amarle, sometimes he answered him, and this again is a line that's confusing to the commentaries because it's not really connected. Rabbi Eliezer, you could say that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Da'amar afilu vitor asur b'mudar. We've seen this opinion a bunch of times, that Rabbi Eliezer holds that even though if you walk through my field normally, I don't charge money for it, but if you're forbidden to benefit from me, you can't walk through my field. Because even though in the world of Dine Mamonot, of financial law and monetary law, it's not considered anything, we're more strict in the land of vows. And that is considered benefit for the sake of vows, even though it has no real financial benefit. So now, like, no monetary value. So now, what's the connection? So the connection would have to be, the best interpretation I saw was that Rabbi Eliezer is stricter, the main thing there is, he's stricter about Nedarim than he is about monetary law. And therefore, that's why the Beit Choron case doesn't work. Because we're going to be stricter. In other words, we could say that our Mishnah holds by the stricter opinion. Whereas Rav Nachman doesn't hold by that opinion. So don't question, Rav Nachman says, don't question me from the Mishnah. The Mishnah follows an extreme opinion. I don't hold by that extreme opinion. And that's a very simple answer. Other than the fact that we don't have any proof that Rabbi Eliezer is strict about other things in Nedarim. It's only specifically Vitor, but one can maybe equate the two. Again, they're not similar, but it's just the concept of being more strict about laws of one who vows to benefit, right, can't benefit. So we're going to be stricter and say, don't try to do these loophole things where you give your stuff away where you don't really mean to give it away. And then the story about the son, where it actually was effective, according to Rav Nachman, we just don't hold like Rabbi Eliezer, so it's fine. We disagree. Okay, last part for today. Tanan, our Mishnah says, Amru Chachamim, Kol matana she'ena she'im ikdisha te'im mekudeshet ena matana. So it says in our Mishnah that the reaction of the rabbis to the story in Beit Choron was to say, any gift that, if you didn't really mean to give it as a gift, that you wouldn't be happy if they sanctified it to the temple, is not a gift. So the main word they want to focus on is kol. Why do they have to say all gifts? Why just not say a gift? So what is the word kol? Kol always comes to include something else. Kol latuye mai, lav latuye haimilta deshadya bekipe. Now this would go against Rav Nachman as well. Is it not to say including the case that we just discussed with the guy who got upset with his son and then wanted to give the money to the son-in-law? That wouldn't work either because, again, if the middle son, right, the son, right, decided, oh, you know what, instead of giving it to my son, I'm going to go sanctify it to the temple. Father wouldn't be happy with that, so that's not a gift then. To which they say, lo, la tuye lishana batra dishmate dirava. No. Kol matana means not only the language used in the Mishnah. We're now going back to the second language of Rava at the bottom of Amud Aleph. Remember, Rava gave two interpretations. Is it specifically this language in the Mishnah? Or even if you say it more loosely, Sheyavo Abba, that my father should come, but not only in the condition that my father comes. So if you remember, the second verse of Rava said it's not only the language in the Mishnah, it's even if you just mention word of your father coming to the meal in your transaction, it would be a problem. That's what the Kol Matana comes to include. Any gift that you didn't really mean it, if you mention, for example, I want to do this so my father can eat, even if you didn't say it as a clear stipulation, it's still going to be forbidden, right? It's not going to work. Okay, and with that, Hadron Alacha Shutafin, so what we did on Amud Bet was we brought another case that was a little similar to Beit We tried to say, could you do this or not? We saw two approaches. We gave Rav Nachman a very hard time. Pumbedita seems to be okay. Their opinion, it's just Kanel Manat Laknot, that doesn't work. We had Rava and Rav Ashi who went against Rav Nachman and said, how could you possibly say this works? Both based on Beit Cholon, both based on other laws we know about Kinyanim. And right, Rav Nachman has some answers, not all the answers. And then, at least at the end, we explained that the Mishnah doesn't necessarily, that word kol doesn't necessarily come to exclude Rav Nachman's opinion, even though theoretically maybe it did, but the Mishnah explains it in a different way. And with that, Hadron Alacha Shutafin finished another chapter of Nedarim. We're moving on tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, to chapter 6. Wishing everyone a great day.